This is another in my series for those who are new to Linux. In this video, I'm going to discuss computers that run Linux. First, how to find out if your existing computer will run Linux, and then how to find a new computer that will run Linux. First question you'll probably have about Linux-compatible hardware is, will Linux run on my existing computer? And the easiest way to find that out is to try it. Now, you don't have to do anything to your existing system. You can download a live image from whatever distribution you prefer, write that live image to a bootable USB stick, and then run it from the live image without affecting your existing system. There are lots of tutorials on how to do this, and I'm not going to go into the details here. But I assume, for one thing, that if you're new to Linux, you're not going to be using Linux to write the bootable USB stick. So you'll have to find some instructions from whatever operating system you're using. Now, for instance, with Ubuntu, you can go to their website, click on Desktop, click on Download Ubuntu, Now, don't download it right away. Go down here a bit. Let's say you're going to try this on a Windows machine. So you go down to Easy Ways to switch to Ubuntu from Windows. It shows you how to burn a DVD on Windows, and it shows you how to create a bootable USB stick on Windows. Now, the same would be true for Mac OS. So I'm going to click on that. And this page will tell you how to do it. So you have to click on the arrow, go down to the next one. It gives you the requirements. Now here they recommend a program called Rufus, a free and open source USB stick writing tool. And they tell you how to use that, and I'm not going to go into the details. But you'll find that other distributions also give you similar instructions. All the major distributions will give you instructions on how to write a bootable USB stick. And if that isn't enough for you, you can always go to YouTube, and you'll find literally thousands of different tutorials. You can run a live disk image from a DVD or a CD if you have a very small image, but that's going to be very slow, and it's not going to give you a very good idea of how well the system works on your computer. If it doesn't work on your computer, there may be several reasons. You might have tried to install a 64-bit image on a 32-bit computer. You might have tried to install a 32-bit PAE system on a computer which only runs 32-bit non-PAE. And these are pretty old subjects by now, but if it won't install, it'll probably give you some reason why it won't install. Otherwise, you can do some homework in the beginning, find out about your current processor, and pick an image which is compatible. Not all distributions have a live image option, but the major ones do. Ubuntu, Fedora, etc. It's a little trickier finding them for Debian, but they're available. It's a little trickier finding them from OpenSUSE, but they're available. Most of the derivatives have a live image as a default. You won't have any trouble. Linux, Mint, MX17, etc. You won't have any trouble finding a live image to install those distributions. If you're interested in buying a new computer that will be compatible with Linux, you may already be running Linux, or you may still be running Windows or Mac OS. You have several different options. One thing you can do is search for computers with Linux pre-installed. And I'm going to click on this website, 16 places to buy a laptop with Linux preloaded. They mention Dell, Emperor Linux, System 76, Linux Certified, LAC Portland, Purism, Think Penguin, Zareason, Mini-Free, Libiquity, Entroware, Viking, Linux Now, Tuxedo Computers, Techno-Ethical, Slimbook, Bounce Lenovo. Some of these companies simply buy computers that are designed to run Windows or Mac OS, most likely Windows, because Macs are overpriced with the 40% margin that Apple charges. They're designed to run Windows, and then they load Linux onto them. If you're buying a desktop rather than a laptop, you're more likely to get something that is specifically built to run Linux from scratch. A couple of points to remember if you're thinking of buying a laptop preloaded with Linux. One thing is that the version it's loaded with may be a little bit old and you may want to upgrade to a newer version, so to some extent you lose the advantage of having it preloaded. Of course, it also may be preloaded with a distribution that you want to change. So again, you're going to have to install your own. Several distributions show computers preloaded with Linux on their website. For instance, Linux Mint. Here's the Linux Mint website. Under Project and Store, you can buy computers and laptops running Linux Mint. Here in Ubuntu Mate, which I'm using at the moment, you can go to Shop and you can find computers preloaded with Ubuntu Mate. Click on Ubuntu Mate Boutique and it opens a website. And here they feature Entroware laptops, Entroware desktops. Again, you have to check to see whether these products are available in your country. One thing you'll notice, however, is that it's not easy to find a really inexpensive computer with Linux preloaded, and the reason for that is fairly simple. It has to do with economies of scale. Even though Microsoft charges computer manufacturers preload their computers with Windows, it's a relatively nominal sum, much lower than it would cost you to buy Windows as a separate operating system. And because of economies of scale, you'll find that these computers with Windows installed are often much cheaper than comparable computers, Linux installed or with no operating system installed, and that's because the vendor has to install Linux on the computer and you're paying the vendor to do that when you could be doing it yourself. So if you're looking for an inexpensive computer, you may want to look for one that has Microsoft Windows already installed. Now, the same would be true for Mac OS, except that, again, Apple charges a 40% margin of profit, so you generally don't look for Macs if you're looking for an inexpensive computer. So the question is, how do you know whether the computer you see on a website with Windows 10 or Windows 8 will run Linux? Well, I would say for the most part, any computer that will run Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7, etc. will probably run Linux. If you're looking back at XP, you may want to be careful because 32-bit systems are harder and harder to find, although there still are many available. But I have installed Linux on XP machines before. When it comes to Windows 8 and Windows 10, it's a little more difficult because there you have the question of the unified extensible firmware interface. This was thought at one time to pose a barrier to installing Linux, but most Linux distributions now have an EFI compatible installation option. I still use the legacy mode myself. My computer is designed to run UEFI, and it came preloaded with Windows 10, but I run a variety of different types of Linux using the legacy mode. I've installed Linux on Hewlett-Packard computers, on Acer computers, on Toshiba computers, on Lenovo computers, and I've never had a problem installing Linux. But there are some computers from all of those manufacturers that will not run Linux, and I think the thing you may want to watch out for is low-end netbooks and ultrabooks, which have a very limited BIOS, which may not allow you to boot from a different system than the one installed. The best way to find out is to Google the question. Do you want to check for the exact model number you're thinking of buying? Of course, if you can see it in the store and try it out, that would be ideal. You can see if there's a way of installing from a USB stick with or without UEFI. When it comes to Chromebooks, they're kind of a special case because they already have a Linux kernel running, and the Chrome OS is based on Gentoo Linux. But these, again, are like Ultrabooks. They have a very limited BIOS, and there are special ways you can install Linux on Chromebooks, but it's a little easier to do on a regular computer. And of course, if you're talented enough to build your own desktop, you'll have no problem at all finding just the minimal components you need to install Linux. Another resource are hardware compatibility lists like this one on the Linux Mint community website. Gives you a lot of statistics in graphical form. If you want to search for a particular piece of equipment, chose type any. So if you click on that, you have a whole series of choices. I'm going to search for a 15.6-inch laptop. I'm not going to be more specific. You could be more specific. Laptop with Core i7, etc. 15.6-inch laptop. Brand. Here's Toshiba Satellite. Unfortunately, Toshiba has sold its business to Sharp. Status any. I'm going to say works perfectly. And release, I'm going to put any release, and this is a release of Linux Mint. I'm just going to put any. Now, the name, I'm going to try C655 and click on search. And it says no hardware found. So I'm going to leave the name off. Click on search. And it gives me a satellite C650-160 and I455. Now remember, these are things that are reported by Linux Mint users. So a certain number of Linux Mint users have reported these specific instances. But if it works with one release of Linux Mint, it's likely to work with other releases of Linux Mint, and it's likely to work with other Linux distributions. So this may be a guide. I happen to have used the Toshiba Satellite C655, and it worked perfectly. So that's why I looked for that. But remember, if you have an unusual graphics card or something, that may not work. So it depends on the exact hardware that you have. This is XRAM Tech. Thanks for watching.